Hello, my lovelies. I'm Jenny O, the author with no last name, and it is November and NaNoWriMo. And this year we are talking about the hierarchy of drafts. And in this video, we are talking about the second draft. So just for keeping everybody on the same page, ease of talking about this type of thing, we are going to talk about this as a 3-draft process, and I'm doing a video for each part of the process. On the 7th, I believe, I put up a video of an overview of it. So today we are going to focus on the second draft. Now, before we get to that, if you have finished a first draft of a novel, yay! Congrats, good job, go you. You have done something really hard and what a lot of people say they're going to do and then never do. So please, please treat yourself to something that you really like and enjoy because you have completed a book. Wow! Okay, so I'm very proud of you. Now, between a first draft and a second draft, what you hopefully are going to do is you're going to close it up, put it in a drawer, and walk away for a couple months. This will allow you to come back to your story with fresh eyes. Sometimes you might have forgotten what you've written. And it's like, did I write that? Man, that's actually better than I thought it was. Wow, what was I thinking when I was writing? This isn't as terrible as I thought. Maybe I'm a better writer than I think I am. Phew. So, the second draft, the purpose of the second draft is to make it comprehensible for readers. This draft is no longer for you. It's for the people you want to read your story if you decide to share your story to the broader world. So think of it as the first draft, that's all about you. That's the story exactly the way you want to tell it. That's you getting everything out on the page. And now the second draft is making it so that other people can understand what you're trying to convey who are not there in your head and are not psychic. Even though my editor tells me to get out of her head all the time and I tell her to get out of mine, you know, as we pass the sweet tea and lemonade, most readers will not automatically understand what you're trying to say in some cases, okay? Now, another thing to do is let's not compare our first drafts to other people's first drafts, okay? The quality of your draft and how much work your draft needs done, so what type of writing advice and guidelines you're going to be running after, is going to depend on your experience as an author. So if this is your first or second, manuscript, don't try to compare it to one of your favorite books or a favorite author who maybe shared part of their first draft online, because you do not know where in the level of experience, their process, that author actually is in. Believe me, a lot of your I'm posting this online stuff is really curated to present a certain image, and it's not real. Alas, it's not real. So, try not to compare your first draft to somebody else's first draft because you have no idea, how much experience they've had and, how long they've been writing and how much they consider what they've written, serious writing versus just for fun writing and things like that. Because the more you write and the more experience you have writing, and actually in some cases, the more you read, if you are an avid reader, this will kind of transpose into your first drafts because, the more experience you have, the more stuff you're going to be able to juggle, the more you're going to be able to take whatever problems you've dealt with previous works and solve them preemptively for the current work, which is now going to have a completely set of new problems for you to figure out. It's like, you might think that you have it all figured out, and then you get to a new project and it's like, no, I don't know what I'm doing at all. Oh my god, why did I try to take on this genre? Ah! Okay, so relax. Your second draft, if you know you've had a lot of experience, might not need as much work as, you know, other drafts do. It's just going to depend on what you've got to work with from the first draft. All right, so what is the second draft really? The second draft is what I call a development edit. Now, there are 2 or 3 types of editing, and the development edit is one of the harder emotionally. It is very difficult, I find, for authors to take that step away from the story they've written for themselves to the point where, oh, now I have to make it a product that is engaging to the reader. I have to make it for somebody else as well. I have to include somebody else's expectations onto my story. And you might run across this attitude, and I know I have, that there are a lot of authors out there that they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that they need to sit down with their story and expand upon it, or take things out, or move things around, or, you know, massage it, I guess, to make it so that a reader who comes into this is going to feel like it's a polished, finished story with a plot that's engaging and, you know, enough tension to make them want to continue to turn pages. Now, a lot of the type of advice I'm going to talk about right now comes from my experience in reading both independently published works and from reading traditionally published works. Look, I spent the last year reading roughly 90 books. In October, I was able to give reviews on about 30 of them. And because I am a person who doesn't like to be cruel, I will not be doing a video of books I didn't finish and why. Okay? Because, I mean, I don't know how helpful that would honestly be to a lot of people, you know, like, I didn't finish The Priory of an Orange Tree, and here's why. I read Percy Jackson, and it made me so mad I threw it across the room even though I finished it, so I'm not going to review it, and this is why. You know, kind of things like that. It's not, I don't want to be that type of person. But, like, I have seen these kind of things, these editing, you know, just things that needed to be edited, that in both the indie publishing sector and the traditional publishing sector. So, it's across all authors type of thing. So nobody is special here, okay? Nobody is special. Everybody is special. But everybody who, even if you have a traditional publishing contract or not, you can still have these kind of downfalls in your novel. I don't believe in bad books, honestly. I just believe in poorly edited books, because a lot of these books would have been really, really good and kept me turning pages. They've just been edited a little more. So this second draft part, this is the emotionally tough part. So be prepared for that. And let's get into it a little more, okay? So what type of advice would I be kind of recommending for a development edit? Okay, so one of the first things you really want to do is to be sure that your story actually has a plot. There's a difference between the story having a plot and having a story which is just a string of scenes put together that have something relative to do with each other on a timeline but it doesn't really accomplish anything. When you're reading a book, you're following the story of a character who is trying to solve a certain problem or accomplish a certain goal. And you want that character to either make a step towards that goal, especially if it's like a series or something, a series that has, you know, some sort of huge over plot arc, or, you know, or maybe it's like a case file or something, or you want to see them accomplish the goal if it's a standalone, or you want to see them fail spectacularly, like if it's a tragedy. Because tragedies exist, so people can fail. That is acceptable in a story, okay? And so there is a beginning, a middle, and end to this book, which will, once you get to the end, no matter if they've completed the goal, made a major step towards the goal, or failed spectacularly, you will feel satisfied that, you know, your time wasn't wasted, because the characters have accomplished something. And that, you know, you as a reader have been emotionally invested in them accomplishing something. Now, a good way that I have found to do this, to figure this out, is to actually summarize your story. Now, you could go out and look for structure advice and plotting advice and, I don't know, be deluged and overwhelmed with all of it, you know, about how conflicts work and everything. I mean, you and I have a video about different types of conflict, but like, in my experience, when you're working on your own project, the best thing to do is, if you're not sure if you have a plot, is to try to summarize it. So, okay, so when and where character has this goal they're trying to accomplish, because if they don't, this will happen. That's the stakes. And this is what's standing in the way, and how they complete it or don't complete it is the story. So maybe you like the who, what, where, when, why, and how question answering, but character, goal, stakes, conflict, obstacles to the goal, which will create tension. If you have all of these things, your structure should fall into place automatically. Now, if you're like really writing something pulp genre or whatever, and or you really feel that you have to have a very rigid structure on your thing, you can go look for structure advice. There's lots of structure advice out there about how to construct a chapter, how to construct a 3-arc plot, how to do a movie plot type of thing, you know, how to use the mountain plot. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there. But what happens is, if you can get your story to organically have it, your story will feel more authentic, rather than at this page you have to have X, okay? Like, really? Well, that's kind of predictable. Yeah. We don't want your story to feel predictable. And if you have these stakes and you have these conflicts and obstacles, it will automatically create the tension to keep readers turning the page, especially if, you know, you have these little mysteries that the characters, these questions the character is trying to solve, or the questions, you know, about their past or whatever, things that you're withholding from the reader because you know them, to create a sense of, I want to say mystery again, but to create a sense of, you know, tension, to, you know, there's stuff to be learned, you know, you want them to continue to explore this world. So that's the first thing you're going to really want to figure out, is, do you have a plot? And then, depending on how the draft is, you might be putting stuff in, you might be taking stuff out, you might be moving stuff around. You might find that the beginning of your story is not at the beginning as the manuscript is written, which is, you know, always fun. I have a project that I found that the beginning of the story was actually halfway through the manuscript. Actually, I've done that twice. The Lone Prospect I was able to salvage by putting in kind of a first chapter of in the future and then going back in time, because I felt that chapter would hook a lot more than the first chapter. when he first shows up and he's writing the letter. I didn't think that was hooky enough. But I've had this problem with other times too, is that here's the beginning of the story and it's in the middle of the story of the manuscript, and how do I take the manuscript and flesh out the back end and still keep the information from the stuff I'm taking out, because there's important information in there. So you might find that in finding out where your beginning of your story is where do the characters start taking action on the story? Where is the actual inciting instinct? Characters who are falling apart of coincidence or fate or act of gods all the time, that gets really tiring. Readers want characters that are doing things. They don't want constantly outside forces acting upon them and they're kind of swept away by it. In Independence Day, sure, the aliens were attacking, but the humans were taking action to try to fight the aliens. Okay. So this is why I don't recommend kidnappings as beginning of stories, because especially like on first books, even sometimes isekai can be really iffy about this, because we're not attached to the character, and we don't care. So save a kidnapping for a later book, because we want to care about the character before outside forces act on them and their agency is taken away, and them having to take their agency back, type of thing. So when we're talking about expounding on things, one of the things you might be expounding on is your world building. And then it can be possible to go too far in your world building and tell too much, and, including, the history of the world, if that's part of the mystery. It is important, but you might need to be expounding on it. And you might, maybe it just doesn't make sense, or maybe you just, you're like, I know I need this to have explanations for this, but I don't want to spend months and months working on this world. I don't know how long I'm going to be in this world. It might not be worth my time. It might not be worth the reader's time. So just think of it as there is the 2 layers down advice. So you need to only go to explain 2 layers down in your world. So, if you have something weird that is there, just take the time to well, this is why it's there, and that's why this works, and that's, a little, because of X, 2 layers down, potentially, it should be enough. And maybe in later books, if you're writing a series, you can come back and expound on it more, but you might not have to. And this will just allow you to go, okay, I've got this explained enough that's not a huge major plot hole or very weird, and I can always come back to it later. Let's keep moving on with the book, keep the readers going, so we don't lose the pacing and the tension, thing. Another thing you might be expounding on, or actually removing stuff from, are your characters. Now, the characters are the carriers of your story, not your world. Your characters. Your characters are the ones interacting with your world. The world is a stage, your set dressing. So we really want to be attached to these characters. And so we don't want them to be boring. Please do not let your characters commit this cardinal sin of being boring. And a lot of times when I am reading characters and they're just boring, it's because they're a job or a sexuality, or both. And they need to have more than that. They need to have, hopes and dreams and the goals and sometimes even if they have that, the fears and the, what do they carry in their pockets? What type of food do they like? What are their hobbies? How do their hobbies interfere with their life, or how do they enhance their life? Who are they doing their hobbies with? If you have hobbies that they do by themselves, that means your character needs some friends, because friends add conflict and character interaction. And are they important? Do they have skills that are important to the story? And if they are important and they end up betraying the party later, they have better be some foreshadowing, or they have better been a part of the crew. I don't want to be betrayed by somebody who's only been on screen for like 30 seconds. You know, that's not very impactful. Do they have an impact on the story? You know, type of thing. And it is possible to tell way too much about your characters. Like, if part of your mystery is your character's backstory or your character's backstory in another life or whatever, and we want to go on a journey with that character, and you're telling us everything about the character or everything about the world, about why the aliens are attacking, or you're telling us everything about, you know, why this whole event is happening, it will ruin things. So you don't want to tell too much about your characters as well. Okay, and then here's something really important: is, do the characters satisfyingly complete the goal of your premise of your story? Or do they fail, or do they do the significant step to the next book? So do they take charge? Do they have agency? And instead of having things go wrong, even into the third act, are the characters doing stuff, or, you know, is it satisfying? Okay, do you have a satisfying ending where the characters have made an impact on their story? Have they grown as people? Okay, so you have the external conflict of what's going on in the plot of the book. Did they make an impact on that? And then you have internal stuff, especially in upmarket fiction, where you're juggling both the internal and the external. But do they grow as people? Do they have that character arc? Now, you can have one or the other, or, you know, one, pulp genres tend to lean towards external plots, while literature tends towards internal plots. It's the upmarket where you get both of them, and upmarket is kind of on a swing, so you might want to understand that. But what we were kind of leading into here with all this advice is the show versus tell balance. Okay, I'm not going to be one of the pieces of advice that I see that it gets so wrong and misinterpreted, and, you know, totally everybody's like, ah, you need to show, don't tell, is precisely that: show, don't tell. And it's like, no, show versus tell in creating the balance. So if you're on a second draft and you're coming across problems that past you had put in there for future you, and future you is now, so you had summarization or question and answer dialogue, or stuff in brackets, and you're sitting here going, I don't know how to fix it. Sometimes it can be your show versus telling balance. So you need to go look for guidelines on what is showing versus what is telling. Now, showing is usually having characters do the thing, characters interacting with each other, and not talking about characters in other areas of the world, like gossip. Most of the time, readers don't care about gossip. So, you know, you can say that they're going to go off and do the thing, but then they have to go off and do the thing and something goes wrong. So you can usually take out the part where you're saying they're going to go off and do the thing, and just say they're going to go off and do the thing. Even with hyperactive, overachieving planners, you don't need to be telling your reader what you're going to do next in the story. Just go and do it next. Or, you know, telling is just being over explaining type of thing, you know, expounding. It's a lot of times when you're telling stuff, it's you not trusting your readers, okay, and to understand what you're trying to say. The showing and telling balance is really about showing enough to your readers that, you know, they can know what's going on, and then giving them enough telling that they're on the right track, but leaving enough, you know, variables and mysteries or whatever that they can still make their own interpretations. You know, it's like trying to explain the punchline of a joke. You know, if you're trying to explain the punchline of your joke, you're trying too hard. So, you go back and just be really careful about it. Um, a lot of times world building can be telling, like instead of going and showing the world or whatever, or you're telling about the world instead of just simply describing the buildings and stuff, and you're trying to tell what these buildings actually do, and we don't need to know that a lot of the times. This can, and sometimes, telling you world building and the history stuff can be in precisely the wrong place. Maybe the characters aren't supposed to know that now, or maybe it comes up later, and putting in there now is just going to mean that the readers have this detail that's not necessarily something they need to know, and they're probably going to forget it by the time it becomes important. Um, Another observation I do have when it comes to telling world building and stuff is authors who rely a lot on their world building in their books. This is not personal. This is just me again making an observation. A lot of times they do this, A, because they really love their setting, and B, it lets them put off doing the hard work of the interaction of the characters. A lot of times I see all this world building, it's great world building, but the characters don't know how to interact with each other because the authors spend all the time world building instead of spending time with their characters and getting them comfortable with each other and getting comfortable with them in their heads. So you might need to be writing some character vignettes. Maybe you need to write the adventures of these characters before this story so it starts to feel natural. So, you know, it, it's kind of the show versus tell stuff can be very much a juggling act. And yes, you do want to lean more towards show over tell, but you're still going to need some telling. I mean, you need to show the emotions and then you need to tell the feelings. And showing emotions is through body language or through physical reactions if you're in some sort of limited point of view, or an omni point of view where you're still inside the character's head and body. And these types of things will ground your reader into what's going on. Like, there's nothing like being a ghost inside of a story. Like, there's absolutely, you don't know if you're cold or hot or you're flushing or whatever. There's no mention of weather. There's no mention of how things feel for the characters, how their skin is reacting or whatever. It's just you're floating through the story as, nothing is getting to you. There's no pain. There's no sadness. There's like, okay. Okay then. Lucky you. And I never feel grounded in those types of stuff. But then you can tell the feeling. You can tell that they're angry or they're embarrassed because you can get flushed when you're angry, you can get flushed when you're embarrassed, and you can or things like that. It is a balance. And sometimes showing that a character loves somebody is like with all that body language and stuff. And then there's the type of person that just never says it, or they'll do things, showing different love languages type of thing. So you might be looking for things like how the body physically reacts to different emotions, or I have, sometimes I forget I have it, to try to stay away from brow furrowed and raised eyebrows and smiles all the time. I do have these charts about facial expressions, and sometimes I remember to use them and sometimes I don't. But you might be looking for things like that at this point of the story to try to vary up your characters so they don't all sound the same. But hey, we all get into the he smirked sometimes trap all the time. um but the younger you are, the younger your audience, sorry, not the younger you are as an author, but the younger your audience, the more you can get away with telling them things, being obvious about it. But even in an adult book, you need to be able to be willing to tell them things at least once. Don't leave them to infer everything. Um, so I know, and you're thinking, that just sounds so easy, Ginny. And yes, lots of sarcasm. No, it doesn't. I'm not going to say this is easy, okay? In the second draft, it's also when you you decide on your point of view and make sure that the entire draft is at whatever point of view you're going to be using. So if you have if you're doing in first person and you're doing limited third, or you're doing third omni. This draft is when you make sure that the entire draft is in that point of view. Okay. So if you're using second person, that is very experimental, and I mean, go for it, but I've only heard of like 1 or 2 traditionally published books in second person. And one of them is like Nona the Ninth, and that was like the second book in a series, and the first book was was either first or limited third, I can't remember. And but you know, if your story, like you were writing the story and you get to the end and you feel like maybe it wasn't actually working, the second draft is when you can be like, okay, I'm going to change the point of view and stuff like that, you know. And another thing to be really, and the last thing that I've got in my notes here, which means we're cutting to the end. I know it's a lot of information. The last thing that you might be looking at when you're working on a second draft is your description. And do you have enough description? Or is everyone running around with a blank face and blank room syndrome? This is really does depend on the author too. Like when you have more experience, you'll be adding description in your first drafts. But a lot of times you're just trying to get that idea out in the first draft, especially when you're younger and you're maybe if you're used to working with other people's IP, you're like, oh, I don't need to say this because everybody knows, so you just gloss over it. And then the description becomes more difficult later on to do because you're like, oh, I don't even know how to do this without it sounding like purple prose. So you might be wanting to go look for advice on how to make this, description, or thinking about how different people see, or, when does eye color actually become important? And so you don't run into the trap of if the skin tone isn't mentioned, it's white type of thing too. It's one of the things I try really hard to do is to mention everybody's skin tone at least once, even if they are white, or fair, or porcelain, or peaches and cream. I try not to like assume that the main characters are white or the non-main characters are white. Like make sure everybody's skin tone is mentioned at least once somewhere of the main cast. And I've gotten dinged by editors who are not my main editor, that are like, oh, you don't need to describe this person over and over and over. And I'm like, well, A, that was the character's voice because she's very detailed oriented. But B, people who aren't neurotypical, we kind of like having repeated description, coming up chapters later and stuff, so we can remember what they look like. Sometimes the description falls out of our head and we're like, what do they look like again? I need to scroll back. Who is it? Okay, that's what they look like. So it's sometimes, you want to sprinkle that physical description, even just little reminders of, hair color or skin color or eye color throughout the book to make sure, people remember, oh, this is what they look like, especially if they're not neurotypical. Don't, try to remember you're catering to a very wide group of people who like to read, and not all of them are going to have the brain wired the exact same way. This is a very big problem in the industry, unfortunately. So, and I know for me, description was one of the last things I started to work on in conflict. I was very conflict averse for a while. So, like, I took an entire fan fiction I was working on at the time to be like, can I even do description? And how am I going to describe these people anyway? And how not to make it, purple prose? And it was like, it was very, very difficult. And, as I got better at it, now I remember more to add description, but even for me, there are times in my second draft where I'm going back and being like, okay, that made sense to me when I wrote it, but now it looks like gobbledygook, so now I need to rewrite it, so the description makes sense to other people, not me, okay? So the second draft is one of those depending on the quality of your first draft, it might be just some stuff you're glossing over, or it might be starting over from scratch and reworking everything. And remember, this is, it's no longer completely about you. It's now about the readers and making sure that your story has a plot that will be engaging to readers to keep them turning the page. It's great that, you had this great story that entertained yourself, but now you have to make it comprehensible to people who don't live in your head with you, which is always fun. So what you will be probably the types of advice you will be looking for is either like some sort of plot advice or summary advice, because that's really a great way to figure out if you have a plot or not, is to be able to summarize things. You'll be looking for more world building advice if you hadn't done a lot of it, and how to put world building into your story without killing your tension. Pacing is such a thing, so dependent on genre that and your vision for your story, that I don't really want to touch pacing, because that's something you could have to work out with a development editor. This is my vision, this is what I'm trying to go for. So to me, I have had people go, the pacing of The Lone Prospect is too slow, because they're expecting a very fast genre pulpy story, and I'm writing a found family cozy a drama, like a TV serial drama. So and that's my vision for is this television serial drama, because it's kind of based off of Sons of Anarchy, so stuff like that. So I don't really like touching pacing, because that's on you. What are you trying to write? What is your pacing of your own story? So we focus more on tension and keeping people turning pages rather than pacing. So you might be looking for world building advice, how to effectively use world building. You might be looking for character building advice and how to effectively build a character, whether it's like character questionnaires or taking quizzes as a character or whatever. Just make sure they have a goal and some dreams and stuff like that. Some fears. If they have skills, take those skills away at some point. And then you're going to be looking a lot at your show versus telling balance. Show, checking where you've given too much away and ruined like the mystery of your story, or over explained and had the punchline fall. How do you keep the impact in your story? Okay. And this can involve character emotions, this can involve, the plot, this can involve how to do a kidnapping, how to write betrayal, how to write a romance. It just depends on what you're working on. And so keeping the story to making sense, and still have things open to interpretation for the readers, and keeping that mystery going, which, provides the tension. And that's like, oh, sounds so easy. No. And I know it's not. So that's unfortunate. And then you also be looking for basic point of view advice again. Just really, really basic stuff. What is first person, what is second person, and what is third person? What pronouns do I use? Things like that. I'm just very basic, nothing too advanced, just very basic point of view, so you can make sure that your story at least has consistent pronouns and verb tenses throughout it. What's past tense versus present tense, just to make sure that it's consistent and, legible for a reader or an editor, okay, to understand. And then description advice, and how description works, where do you cross the line over into purple prose type of thing? How do you keep your clear, concise, like a ringing of a bell type of thing? And how different characters might interpret different things, how they see. It really just depends on the character. And I know it's a lot to think about, but that's what the second draft is. The second draft is just ripping things apart and putting it all back together and expounding and, you know, maybe taking stuff out because you need it for a later book, or, you know, maybe you need to be going off and writing several vignettes and you're like, maybe I'll have to use these for short stories later, or maybe you won't use them at all, but so you can get your character voices down and character interactions down. And second drafts can be just as messy or more messy as the first drafts, and that might be second, third, and fourth drafts. It's just what you're looking at there is to make that story engaging to a reader. Okay? I'm not, I know it seems like a lot, and because it is a lot. And the more experience you have as an author, a lot of times the less of this is what you're going to have to do, depending on project, you know, as time goes by. You know, so remember, don't compare your first draft to anybody else's first draft, and what you're doing in your drafting process as a second draft to anybody else's process, okay? This is all so individual to you and individual to your project of how much work that needs to go into it. Try not to get overwhelmed. Please try not to get overwhelmed. If you have to, here's the one thing that I did when I was learning to write, is I attacked things, you know, in different stories, one thing at a time. So if I was just not going to be publishing, you know, as a indie author or whatever, if I was working with somebody else's stuff or even my own stuff, I would be like, in this story, I'm going to work on dialogue, and I would work on just creating the best dialogue that I could, you know, and improving my dialogue. And then in the next story, I'd be like, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work on characterization, or I'm going to work, like I said in that one story, I worked on description. And finally, I was like, I need to figure out if I can actually do this conflict thing, you know. So don't be afraid to break it down bit by bit and just attack your manuscript bit by bit. You know, you don't have to do it all at once. Alright, and this video has gotten long because second drafts are just so messy like that. Development editing is probably one of those really, it could take 1 month, it could take 6 months type of thing. So just take your time with it, you know, enjoy the process, even though it can be emotionally hard, right? Take care of yourselves, my lovelies. Bless, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.